Good morning, everyone. As Allison said, my name is Michelle Selzer, and I'm the Western Lake Erie Basin Strategist for the state. And I, too, would like to welcome you to the conference. I'm really glad to see a full house. I also want to thank our DAP team members. If you all could just raise your hands, I'd like to acknowledge that most of you are here today. Great, thank you. So I'd like to kick things off and provide you with background on the topic of harmful algal blooms. What are the binational jurisdictions doing to address them, including our domestic action planning efforts, and then we'll briefly cover the plan for the day. This satellite image of Lake Erie was taken on September 11th, September 2011. It is overlaid on a graphic of the major Lake Erie tributaries. This image shows the bloom 6 weeks after it initiated in the Western Basin. On this date, it covered the entire Western Basin and was beginning to spread into the Central Basin, where it continued to grow until October. This was the largest algal bloom recorded in history, with a peak intensity over 3 times that of any previously observed bloom, and triggered a binational call to action to address the problem, and that problem is phosphorus. Tackling this problem in the source, contributing to harmful algal blooms, is a complex and a binational issue, and it will take all the Lake Erie jurisdictions and our partners to achieve and maintain the phosphorus reduction goals that have been set under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. The U.S. and Canadian federal governments, along with the 8 Great Lakes states and 2 provinces of Canada, have a long history dating back to the Boundary Water Treaties of 1909 and of working together to achieve shared water quality-related goals for the Great Lakes. The priorities that restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the waters of the Great Lakes. There are 10 annexes in the agreement, and these are theme areas. Annex 4 is the nutrient annex that outlines the lake ecosystem objectives, interim phosphorus concentration, and loading targets as a starting point in starting up and updating the targets for Lake Erie that have been in previous versions of the agreement. In the agreement, the U.S. and Canadian governments agreed to work with the state and provinces through the Annex 4 subcommittee specifically to address phosphorus. They agreed to cooperate and coordinate across jurisdictions, develop programs, practices, and technology necessary for better understanding the Great Lakes Basin ecosystem, eliminating or reducing to the extent practicable environmental threats to the waters of the Great Lakes, threats such as excessive nutrients. The 2012 agreement was the first agreement that called for the development of the domestic action plans. All of the federal, state, and provincial jurisdictions are required to develop them. The plans are meant to outline management actions to reduce phosphorus concentrations and nutrient loading to Lake Erie, to specifically address the extent, duration, and toxicity of the harmful algal blooms like we saw in 2011. The quality of life agencies, including MDARD, EGLE, and DNR, are responsible for engaging in the Annex 4 subcommittee process and for developing and implementing the DAPs and our adaptive management approach. The DAP team is an integral part of that process. I'd like to briefly highlight the respective roles of the agencies. MDARD partners with local conservation districts to support federal Farm Bill programs, supports and implements the Michigan Agricultural Environmental Assurance Program, supports practice implementation with additional state funding that's been provided for the Western Basin, and more recently, we are funding an effort to formally track progress using the Great Lakes Watershed Management System that you'll learn more about today. EGLE permits point sources such as wastewater treatment plants in operation in the basin, regulates concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, and in the last few years have partnered with federal agencies to increase the monitoring of water quality and expanding our network in the basin. And they also have their non-point source program that provides technical and financial assistance for planning and implementing watershed management plans. The DNR assesses, monitors fish and wildlife populations and their habitats, and has a DAP priority focused on protecting and restoring fish and wildlife populations, and has a particular focus on protecting and restoring wetlands in the basin. And you'll hear more about these projects and efforts throughout the conference. Am I supposed to point there? Can you just advance? Thank you. There's a few clicks here. The EPA and Environment Climate Change Canada are the co-leads of the Annex 4 Committee and have worked with the states and provincial jurisdictions to guide planning and implementation of the DAPs, including identifying point source and non-point sources of phosphorus and identifying what tributaries and associated watersheds need to be addressed in the DAPs. So now I want to orient you to where the Western Lake Erie Basin DAP geography are geographically located. The DAP is primarily focused on the Great Lakes Water Authority wastewater treatment plant in Detroit and 3 other key wastewater treatment plants highlighted in the purple symbols. These plants are a priority because they contribute 90% of the point source nutrient load to the system. The non-point source focus areas are the River Raisin watershed, there we go, and the Bean and St. Joseph River watersheds, which collectively make up the Upper Maumee watershed and are highlighted here in yellow. The River Raisin was selected as a priority watershed because we have a long-term water quality monitoring station located here, and it has been one of the high 3 agricultural land use watersheds for the state where water quality related programs like the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or CREP, has been implemented over the last few decades. The St. Joe and Bean Creek watersheds were selected primarily because they are part of the Upper Maumee River watershed. You are actually in the River Raisin watershed here today. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement Annex 4 Subcommittee, through their process and in partnership with the Lake Erie jurisdictions, set forth a 40% phosphorus reduction targets for the lake to largely achieve a 6,000 metric ton reduction goal relative to a 2008 baseline. This is a simplified table showing Michigan's contributions, our baseline, and the reductions amount that we are meant to achieve. Our allocation in the Lake Erie Basin is 1,116 metric tons. So we're building off of that a 40% reduction. Those reductions will primarily come from the Detroit River, which is primarily a point source driven geography, and also from a non-point source perspective, which equates to about 223 metric tons, will need to come from the River Raisin and the Upper Maumee tributaries, along with other associated tributaries that are outside our priority areas. The point of this slide is to show that when taken together, approximately 2/3 of the total phosphorus reduction amount will need to come from point sources, and the remaining 1/3 will come from agricultural non-point source reductions. You'll learn more about how we are assessing and more formally tracking our efforts towards these reduction amounts. The state has been actively involved in efforts to address the phosphorus issues since the 2012 Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement called for the DAPs. In May of 2015, Annex 4's Objectives and Targets Task Team set a binational percent phosphorus load reduction target for all the U.S. and Canadian jurisdictions, but they did not set a time-bound commitment to achieve them. In June of 2015, Michigan, Ohio, and the province of Ontario's governors and premiers signed on to the Western Lake Erie Basin Collaborative Agreement. They set an aspirational goal of a 20% reduction by 2020 and a 40% reduction of total phosphorus by 2025. With guidance from the EPA, the state began to draft our first DAP, and it was meant to describe how the state was addressing our portion of the nutrient loading to the Western Lake Erie Basin. In 2021, we produced a separate adaptive management plan to show, to actually learn about the adaptive management process itself and to develop a more formal process to guide our actions moving forward. We are now in the process of developing the DAP update, and you'll learn more about what we've been working on over the last 5 years and what is being planned for the next DAP cycle. So what is the non-point source challenge? As mentioned earlier, point source reductions have been met and helped Michigan achieve our aspirational goal of 20% by 2020. That was set under the Western Lake Erie Collaborative Agreement. However, actual and based and projected phosphorus reductions show that historic efforts to implement non-point source controls, especially in the River Raisin, has not yet been fully met, and we will not meet our 2025 goal. As the graph on the bottom shows of this slide, the bottom part of the green line is the 103 metric ton reduction goal we are meant to achieve. And it shows that that the River Raisin loading has not been consistently met. In fact, phosphorus is going up, and we know that our current efforts are not sufficient. You'll hear from Director Boring this afternoon at lunch that delivery of current conservation programs and the necessary technical assistance must evolve. We must innovate. We also need to do more to improve our ability to detect change in the water and better understand factors such as weather variability and flooding that can overwhelm positive signals of management actions that might have been otherwise detected in our monitoring. Improving our understanding of human and ecological processes that influence nutrient loading is a priority of our adaptive management process. And this non-point source challenge will take all of us pulling in the same direction towards achieving shared goals and tackling this issue together. So now the plan for the day. The plan for the day is to do several things. Frame phosphorus management within the adaptive management process, hear about progress made to maintain phosphorus from members of our DAP team and agency staff, hear from experts who study phosphorus in the Western Lake Erie Basin, and learn from the Western Lake Erie Basin Science Panel. You'll also hear about our responses to the Science Panel report, and we'll provide you with some updates on where we're heading in the 2023 Domestic Action Plan. Sorry about that. So with that, again, thank you all for attending. I hope you enjoy the conference, and with that, I'll turn it over to Allison.